Friday, everyone. It's HogvilleNET YouTube Live. I'm Kevin McPherson. We're pushing toward 2 o'clock. It's Friday. It's the weekend coming up. And it doesn't change the fact, no matter what your plans are, you may have some great stuff planned. It may not change the fact that you're having some anxiety over this Arkansas basketball roster 2.0. 2.0 under John Calipari. He'll be entering his second season as head hog. He's left few questions in terms of the quality of the recruits he brings in and how he builds a roster when you talk about just talent and guys that are coveted. That's never been in question. And so the questions are still out there. There are several. How do you address needs? If you're going to add one more, I guess don't rule out two. But the last source information I had, which I brought to you yesterday, as the staff has indicated maybe one more. Good afternoon, Kevin. Unbiased Brim. Sorry, Unbiased Brim. And I see you all the time, Unbiased. I can't believe I almost butchered the unbiased part that precedes Brim. Thank you for the comment. Part of it is, well, had to pump the brakes. We're on pause for a while to see how you complete the roster. Assuming when they say they like the 10 they have, we know Karter Knox is part of that. Well, that's the double whammy on the anxiety. While you're waiting to see how do they address needs or just one more player, period, whether it's a need, best available, someone special, some of the words have been thrown around, then the other part of that is arguably the most important player you're returning, Karter Knox, is in the NBA draft process. So we spent time yesterday. The last part, we kind of broke it up into three main parts. The last part, I went through some of the mock drafts, with all the caveats, mock drafts, especially this early, especially once you get outside the kind of no-brainer top-level guys, you take it with a grain of salt. But there's one that came out that kind of got everybody's attention, and justifiably so, just because, Karter Knox was projected after just being in the pool for a few days. One came out on Wednesday that had him going 36. Well, that's a good spot. That's guaranteed, at least 2 years guaranteed money. We went through some of those numbers on recent draft picks. One at that exact spot 2 years ago, and then Jalen Williams, former Pro Hog, 3 or 4 years ago, and that I think it was the 22 draft, and he went 34th. So, and we went through what some of the salary numbers look like for those first 2 years. Of course, we know NIL competes with that. So that was yesterday, and then earlier today, I think it was. Well, it was a combination of today and yesterday. It was after I'd done that segment when Jonathan Givony, Draft Express, ESPN, everyone's familiar with him, one of the top NBA draft guru guys that really analyzes all this and puts up a big board, puts up, mock drafts that he'll update throughout as we get closer and go through combined individual team workouts. And those things become more clear, so they obviously change and evolve. But he put out a big board. And that big board included the three Razorbacks that we know are in the NBA draft. Adu Thero, he had it in the high 20s, so effectively a late first round value, I think 26th. He had Boogie Fland at 53, which would be late second round. But he had Karter Knox at 59. Well, there's exactly 59 picks in the NBA draft, so he's saying there's a chance. And typically the closer you get to the back end, the fewer opportunities to get guarantees with the contract. Although that's not always true. Sometimes a team, that's just where their pick is, and they don't think that you'll be picked before you get to them, and they're not going to move up to get you, but they might give you a draft guarantee or a contract guarantee aside from just being drafted. So you can never even take that off the table. But now Knox on a big board in addition to the one mock draft coming in at 36. So people are like, I think Hog fans seeing that while they're on pause, waiting to see who fills out what's maybe one or two more, probably one, to complete this roster. Now you're thinking, oh goodness, what if it's two? What if it's two? So that's why we addressed the mocks yesterday, but the updated information later yesterday with the big board. And then today, Givony, the same content provider and draft analyst, put out an interview he did in New York City with Karter Knox. Put out highlights. He put out interviews with Boogie Fland and Jeremiah Fears from OU, who are in the draft, obviously, yesterday, also in New York City working out. and then Karter Knox highlights also working out in New York City. Okay, so that's draft prep. If you go back over the years, and this is interesting because one of the Hog fans on Twitter, it was almost 2 weeks ago. Tomorrow will be exactly 2 weeks. Karter Knox had posted a photo from New York City to his Instagram account 2 Saturdays. Well, tomorrow will be 2 Saturdays ago, 2 weeks. I think it was April 12th. And a Hog fan saw it, sent me a DM saying, "What does this mean?" Well, this is a few days before the retention announcements that were preceded by Knox's announcement that he was going to declare for the draft, test the process, and leave his options open. So he's been in New York prepping even before his announcement came out. It's not unlike announcements that came out well after guys like Jalen Williams were no longer in Fayetteville. They were getting ready for the draft. I knew at the time we weren't doing these podcasts that back then. So I was putting it over on the board at HogvilleNET, as well as some of my recruiting note articles and, hoop hog notebooks and things like that, that J. Will had a draft guarantee, and that he was off campus and not even in Fayetteville and was working out and preparing for the draft. Even though technically he'd left open the possibility of coming back, that really wasn't a possibility. This is different. I see this very differently with Karter Knox. Yeah, he's been there at least a couple of weeks, right? We got the breadcrumbs on that. I just kind of went through it in New York City working out for the draft. But instead of just going back and forth on some of these early mock drafts and the big boards, and then, you see the highlight videos of him working out where he doesn't miss a shot. That's how highlights work. The drill on that. I thought I'd go ahead and just reach out. I wanted to get a kind of a kaleidoscope of thoughts from some of the folks that are directly involved in some of this stuff. And so I did that, and most of that done today. And so instead of just getting perspectives from the same kind of draft analyst, I kind of moved it around like I like to do. I want a kind of a 360-degree view of it. And so I talked to an NBA team scout. I talked to an agency scout. So agents have scouts on their staffs, and they're searching for potential clients, but it's not just based on scouting interest of potential clients, but actually scouting the player. A lot of these agency scouts are not much different than the NBA team scouts. They have varying levels of experience, whether it was at some point as a scout themselves, as a college coach, whatever, NBA on an NBA staff, that kind of stuff. So they're not chopped liver. So NBA team scout, an agency scout, and then I also wanted to talk to one of the draft gurus, one of the main ones. There's less than a handful that I really respect in terms of the quality that they do, and proven consistently year in and year out. Not only I can tell with some of the feedback I get, sometimes some of the folks that they're probably talking to, because they almost have sometimes the same talking points or things that I'm hearing before I heard it from them. And then sometimes they'll put it out, and then I hear, I can put it together who they talk to based on what I heard after they put it out. But some of these guys do a really good job. So I've got 3 sources on this today, just their thoughts on it right now with Karter Knox. I talked to 4. 2 of the draft gurus, not scouts, 2 of the draft gurus that are kind of national guys everybody knows about. One of them wanted what they told me to be completely off the record. So I'm not going to be able to share that. I have to honor that. The other one doesn't want to be directly quoted, so I can paraphrase what they said. So I'm going to do that. But everyone remains anonymous. That's how it goes. All right, we're almost 9 minutes in. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. I'm Kevin McPherson. So as far as Karter Knox goes, what I asked these folks, it wasn't just about where do you see it now, because it's pretty clear right now he's just getting started. He's not someone that people were talking about, that's a first round if he comes in. No one was doing that. They're talking about first round if he hangs out for the 20 and does this in a year's time and goes back to school. But now he's in the process, so now they're evaluating this stuff. So I asked them not just where they see it now, but kind of best case scenario or range if things go well at the combine. By the way, do y'all think he's getting a combine invite? Unanimously, people think he's going to get a combine invite. The combine's in mid-May, 11th through the 18th. Last year, with 58 picks in the draft, this year there's 59 in the 2 rounds. 78 players were invited to the NBA draft combine. So almost 20 more than there are picks, basically. Hey, so if the number's somewhere around there again, you're going to have a surplus of guys going. And then you also have the G League Elite Camp where players that aren't invited to the combine are going to be invited to participate in. So you're keeping an eye on all of this. But most think he'll be, in fact, invited to the big one, the combine. Okay. So what are your thoughts then? My question was sort of as maybe a ceiling of where this could go. What maybe a range if you don't have just a ceiling, but maybe a floor and a ceiling somewhere in where you think it could go. If like say he blew up the combine, things like that. So there's always this. All it takes is one team to fall in love, one GM, make a draft guarantee, and convince a guy to go. We've been saying that. It's always been the same way. It's what Isaiah Joe had when he U-turned back to the NBA and went 49th. Didn't matter what that was. He had a really good draft guarantee, and it was honored. So those things can happen. But aside from that, this is what I got from the agency scout. When I asked give me a high end range, give me this and that, I got 5 words back. And I'm going to quote it. I'm not going to paraphrase. I'm going to quote this. He'll be back at college. So there's that. The NBA team scout. This was the feedback. He'll make more going back to school if he's not a first rounder. He's not coming out to be a second rounder. He wants feedback from teams. All right, so there are examples of some really good early second round. Some of those deals are close to late first round, and you might have more flexibility. The team would also build in some kind of team flexibility. So I don't completely dismiss, again, that something like that can happen. But I think when you ask folks not only how they see it now, but even looking down the line, they're basically not even given a range for this guy. They're leaving that part out, which is part of what I asked for. And I think they're pretty adamant right now. They don't see that he's going to stay in this draft. And now that could change. They could change their minds once a combine plays out or once they start getting wind of some of the individual team workouts, things of those nature. But these guys are really good at this. And usually I get answers back. I got answers back on guys like Adu Thera and Boogie Fland as far as draft ranges, the idea that they're probably going to stay in. They're really focused on it. Everybody here is in the same camp. One of the NBA draft gurus, again, there's less than a handful of ones they're the ones you would recognize, big names. One off the record, I can't share what he said. The other one, I'm just paraphrasing. But he doesn't see, the one I'll paraphrase for, doesn't see a path that doesn't lead back to Arkansas. That's effectively what he said. Doesn't see it. So this is where, yes, it's partly where they see it right now. It's still new. He just went in 8 days ago, Thursday, when he made the announcement. Again, he's been in New York City for a while. We know that because of our sleuths out there on social media posting photos and then asking us behind the scenes. Really, people were worried maybe he'd already entered the portal and was in New York City to talk to Rick Pitino or something. But really, it was all about, his draft preparation. And so he's got to go through the process. His announcement came out a few days later, but, he was already in New York. So, again, we don't know how long he was there, but we know it was as soon as April 12th. That was a Saturday. That was when he put that photo to Instagram. And players don't travel a whole lot once they get into that grind and that training. They typically stay put for that. That was the case with Dan Gafford for the most part a few years ago. The same with Jalen Williams. And by the way, one of these agency scout, this particular one, is also the one that was involved with the Jalen Williams situation a few years ago. Now, he's not directly involved in this one, but he had a pretty quick answer. 5 words, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can count still. Sometimes I wonder. But that's where it is right now. Again, combine. But here's the thing with let's just compare him for a little bit with a guy like Adu Thera. Thera 6'7", 6'8", just powerfully built, but also explosive. And a guy that over 3 years they've seen enough to say, well, he's a high energy guy. There's a lot to be desired, a lack of skill, things that, but there's a lot to really like about him because of the defensive versatility, his age and maturity in terms of, just having been at a high level, not the NBA level, but at the high major level for a few years. And so there's some value there. You always hear, well, older guys, the longer they stay in college, the more it hurts their draft prospects. For someone like Adu, he grew. He wasn't always 6'7", 6'8" when he got to college at Kentucky. And he had his best season some proof of concept that there may be some real value there for him. Karter Knox is still very young. And they'll draft young guys. We know that all the time, one and dones. But a lot of times those guys have a consistent, either a superpower like elite athleticism or some kind of crazy elite length, or they put up just incredible numbers. And, a guy like Moses Mooney, who was, Arkansas's leading scorer, ended up being a lottery pick, but had a 7'1" wingspan on a 6'5" height, 6'5" with a 7'1" wingspan, really broad shoulders, wasn't explosive athletically, but was a really good all-around player and first team all everything when you looked at it SEC wise. And he ended up having a runway to being a lottery pick, and a guy that came into his freshman season with first round projections, and that never changed. It was back in first round. He grew it in the lottery by the season he had. Karter Knox had a really good second half of the season. 36 games, the last 18 games. We've gone through the percentages, efficiency, all that. But he really wasn't consistently a volume scorer. He doesn't have a superpower athletically. If you start making combinations like you do with Thero, he's a little shorter, right? 6'6", not 6'7", 6'8". He is powerfully built, not as explosive as a guy like a Thero. So I'm making that comparison only to say that even though Knox's skill level's a notch better, obviously, or maybe two when you looked at it by the end of the year, it's really not anything that jumps off or splashes first round right now. So I've always kind of felt that way. That doesn't mean that if you go, I mentioned the last 18 games, if you drill that even more down even more, as you got closer to the end when you got to the end of the season and just looked at the last two games, St. John's and then the loss to Texas Tech, he kind of added some stuff in there. I mean, he had 4 blocks against St. John's. His ability to use that physicality and get to the rim against really good teams with really good players just continue to improve, his shot selection, all that. So if they just focus on film as how it ended, and then he has great workouts and things like that, all these narratives, sure, they could change. They absolutely could change. But for now, just looking at mocks and seeing big boards and things like that, that's one thing, and it can put a little scare into you when you start to see some momentum maybe, or you think it's momentum. But behind the scenes, and really drilling it down, there's been really no hesitation from the varying levels, whether, again, it's an NBA team scout, an agency scout, or one of the draft gurus that's talking to all the teams all the time. Most of those guys have connections. They'll get some smoke screens thrown at them and this and that, but all of this is lining up to effectively the same message. And I know it's early. Again, we just went through it. Things can change on that. But these folks, even given the chance to say, top end, what would he have to do? I mean, it almost sounds like he'd just have to completely, blow away the curve on this, on what's expected. And that does happen sometimes, but usually it's guys that, again, have some superpowers kind of already. And then you see them in these settings where they just kind of their measurables, the combination of their measurables are just better than some really good players. And then some competitive stuff they do, some of the interview stuff, and it's just a combination of things, and it just shoots them up. That does happen. So you can't rule that out. But right now I'm not seeing what that would be with Karter. And I think that's what goes back to where these opinions are, giving them a chance to say, okay, what you see right now, but best case, again, if he, and it's kind of like, yeah, we're still kind of at that same line. All it takes is one team, but in general, they're just not seeing a path for anything but coming back to Arkansas. Not one person I talked to had anything different to say about this. And I told you, I talked to multiple with a little bit different perspectives on what their job is and how they've, through what prism they view this through. All right, almost 20 minutes in, I'm going to sign off. I wanted to get that in today. I still think, and I've always said that I think Karter Knox will come back, and I think he'll be part of that 10, and that obviously will impact how Arkansas finishes this class. And you may be looking at some kind of a depth piece, whether it's, it's some combination of shooting, depth on the front line, maybe another piece at the 4. If it's a wing that can shoot, great. That's kind of how I see it. I think Arkansas is obviously also going to add others, the Jaden Carroll-Letwa types on the back end of it. We'll see how many of those. But when you start hearing some of those names, even if it's a guy like Cass Chavis, who was ranked top 50, a 3-star, and had signed already with a high major school and got out of that and came to Arkansas, you can't necessarily look at something like that and think, okay, that's definitely going to be playable depth. No, Chavis was not playable depth. He appeared in one game. Doesn't mean guys like that aren't important to getting through practices and your locker room and things like that. But just remember that. And then the other thing is, real quick, just a couple of housekeeping items. We didn't talk yesterday. I don't think it had come out yet. Travis Perry, who had signed with Kentucky, that 6-player high school class when Cal was there, in-state kid, broke all the scoring records, put out a list of the teams that have contacted him. I think he went in the portal on the last day. I believe that's right, that it was open earlier in the week. And I've from the staff, Arkansas is not in on that. Arkansas's name was mentioned on the contact list. The way I actually heard it almost sounded like that was just something fluff and put in there. So I can't promise you that Arkansas didn't, make some kind of a courtesy call, like almost like a courtesy flush when you're in a public bathroom. I don't know why I went there. So I can't, but it was almost like that's fake news type of thing. So that's that on Travis Perry, 6'1" guard. Ended up having to play at stretches in key moments for Kentucky because of their backcourt injury issues and lack of depth at the one spot. Again, a guy that when you look at him numerically, there's no reason to think if he stays in the SEC level, with maybe an exception or two like Ole Miss. I've been told by multiple that keep an eye on Ole Miss there. But mostly, kind of a depth piece for somebody anyway, not a main rotation guy. But again, if it doesn't sound like it's applicable to Arkansas coming from the staff on that. And then the other thing is Ryan Forrest, an in-state kid, played at North Carolina A&T, real productive guy. Arkansas, he competed against the Razorbacks in the non-conference, and I think it was it December or November? I already forgot. I think it was December. Arkansas won that game big. But he was a guy that when he went in the portal, when it first opened, remember it opened on March 24th, a Monday, and he already had a list come out and Arkansas was on it and already reported to you guys, that's also a courtesy contact. That's not a player that Arkansas is pursuing. But his list came back out through his agents. And that came out, I think, today. I don't know if it was just updated with more teams. I didn't even circle back to look at the original one, but you see Arkansas on an updated list coming out from one of the national guys. Again, that's not something I haven't checked with the staff on that again, but that's something that's I don't see with anything there. Certainly, if he's looking for NIL money, again, if an in-state kid wants to come and be one of the others that doesn't play on the back end, which I just don't see that for him. But if he did, or a guy like Terrion Burgess in class 2025, if they wanted to just fill a roster spot and get the experience of practice under this system and this coaching. And kind of be on the back of things. Those things aren't really, right now, the way I see it, realistic for either one of those guys. But I thought I'd do a little minor housekeeping here at the end and get on the record with a couple of things that we haven't talked about since yesterday. 24% from 3 is unacceptable. All right, guys, thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. We're shrinking these down, right? We're at right around 24 minutes. We're getting out of here just under 25. Again, the news from the NBA, the folks tied to it is nothing to see here right now. And again, I tried to get them to stretch out their imagination to what if some things really go well for him. And the answer is kind of blunt and the same. He's coming back to Arkansas. So this could change. We don't close the door that again, one team. And if any of these guys get wind of that, they'll let me know. And then we'll be having another tune. So you hope it doesn't happen. But until next time, thank you for being here. We'll jump in if we need to, if something breaks. I don't anticipate that, but hell, there are other things I was anticipating and I was wrong about. So maybe we'll see how quickly things move along or how not quickly. I have a feeling not only with Karter Knox, but maybe some other players Arkansas is on could drag out until that deadline to withdraw May 28th. That's still nearly 5 weeks away. Until next time, thanks for being here. See you then.